The clock had just struck midnight, and the streets of Willow Park lay silent beneath a soft, hazy mist. The quiet was thick, only occasionally broken by the distant hum of passing cars or the flutter of leaves in the cool breeze. In the heart of the neighborhood, where row houses stood shoulder to shoulder, a young girl was making her way through the dimly lit streets, her eyes fixed on the distant glow of the fire station ahead. Layla held tightly to a bundle in her arms, her heart pounding with every step. The faint weight and warmth she carried were all too real. A responsibility she hadn't anticipated but couldn't ignore. Her face was streaked with tears, her lips trembling from both the cold and the overwhelming fear gripping her. Each time she glanced down, she caught sight of a tiny hand peeking from the blanket, fragile and small, reminding her that every moment counted. The fire station loomed closer, its lights piercing the night like a promise of hope. Layla quickened her steps, her knees feeling weak, but her resolve steady. This was the only place she knew might help without judgment. A safe haven where people ran toward danger, not away from it. She repeated this thought, using it to fight the gnawing doubt that her choice was foolish or that she might have done something wrong. As she reached the entrance, she hesitated, clutching the door handle with a shaky hand. "Please. Help," she whispered, as if the building itself might hear her plea. Inside, Captain Ava Marshall was just finishing her rounds. She was a seasoned firefighter, someone who had seen it all, from roaring flames to desperate rescues. Yet when she looked up and saw Layla standing there, her face instantly softened with concern. Ava's sharp instinct sensed that this wasn't just a lost child or a routine drop-in. "Hey there," Ava called gently, stepping forward. "Are you all right?" Layla barely managed a nod, her voice catching as she tried to speak. She slowly unwrapped the blanket, revealing the tiny, nearly translucent figure of a newborn, gasping softly for air. Ava's breath caught, and without a second thought, she signaled to her team. "Frank, get the medical kit," she shouted, her voice steady but urgent. "We've got a newborn here." Within seconds, the station buzzed with activity as firefighters surrounded Layla and the baby, each of them moving with practiced care. The quiet, rhythmic hum of the oxygen mask was a relief to Layla, who could finally breathe a little easier knowing help was here. She sank into a nearby chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion bear down on her. Captain Ava knelt beside her, her warm hand resting reassuringly on Layla's shoulder. "What's your name?" "Sweetheart." "Layla," she whispered, looking up with eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. "My name's Layla." Ava nodded gently, giving her a soft smile. "And who is this little one?" Layla's gaze drifted to the tiny bundle as a fresh tear rolled down her cheek. "His name is Josiah. I delivered him myself. My mom was too weak. And she was scared. And I just didn't know what else to do." The weight of her words settled over the room, filling the air with a heavy silence. The firefighters exchanged glances, each realizing the enormity of what this young girl had done. Captain Ava felt a swell of pride and admiration for Layla, this brave, resourceful girl who had carried the responsibility of an adult without hesitation. "You did the right thing, Layla," Ava said softly. "You were incredibly brave. And Josiah, he's here because of you. We're going to take care of both of you." For the first time that night, Layla allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. In the safety of the fire station. Surrounded by strangers who were now allies. She felt the first stirrings of relief. Her journey had just begun. And she knew that it would be a hard road ahead. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. As the firefighters worked, Captain Ava stood by her side. Her hand a steadying presence on Layla's shoulder. Together, they watched as little Josiah's chest rose and fell. Each breath a fragile, precious reminder that sometimes hope could be found even in the darkest hours of the night. The following morning, sunlight filtered gently through the windows of the fire station, casting a warm glow over Layla and little Josiah. Layla hadn't slept. Yet she felt an unusual sense of calm wash over her as she watched the tiny rise and fall of Josiah's chest. She felt her fingers clench around the edges of the chair she sat in, grounding herself to reality. He was alive, safe, and in good hands. But she knew this was just the beginning. Captain Ava approached quietly, carrying a steaming mug of hot chocolate. "Here, Layla," she said gently, passing it over. "I thought you might want something warm." Layla accepted the mug, offering a small smile of gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling the warmth seep through her hands. The comforting smell reminded her of early winter nights back home, before things had gotten complicated. "Do you feel ready to talk a little more about what happened?" Ava's voice was calm and soothing. A gentle invitation rather than a demand. Layla hesitated, her eyes drifting down to her hands. The silence stretched for a moment before she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "My mom, she never wanted anyone to know about Josiah. I mean, she was scared. She's been through a lot. And with everything we already have to deal with," her voice trailed off as she struggled to find the words to explain. Ava nodded, her expression filled with understanding. She'd seen families struggle in ways others could hardly imagine. Life wasn't always kind. And she knew Layla's mother must have been burdened by secrets of her own. "Your mom is lucky to have a daughter like you," Ava said, her voice soft and warm. "What you did, bringing Josiah here, it took courage. More than some adults might have." Layla's lips trembled as she bit back tears. She had spent countless nights awake, worrying about her mother, about their life. And now, about Josiah. A small, protective part of her ached, longing to shield him from the world's harsh realities. "Do you think he'll be okay?" she asked, her gaze fixed on her baby brother. The question was as much about Josiah's health as it was about the uncertainty of their future. Ava gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "He's strong, Layla. And he's already got you looking out for him. We're going to get him the care he needs. And we'll find a way to help you and your mom, too." Just then, the door swung open, and a familiar figure stepped inside. Layla's heart dropped as she recognized Mrs. Whitaker, a kind neighbor from down the street who had been a quiet yet dependable presence in their lives. Dressed in a light cardigan and holding a bag of food, she looked at Layla with both surprise and relief. "Oh, Layla," Mrs. Whitaker gasped, rushing over. "I was so worried when I heard. I came as soon as I could. How's the baby?" Layla offered a grateful smile as Mrs. Whitaker gently squeezed her hand. "He's okay," she said softly. "The firefighters here, they saved him." Mrs. Whitaker turned to Captain Ava, her eyes misting with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for helping her." This girl's been through so much. Captain Ava nodded, her gaze shifting between Layla and Mrs. Whitaker. We're here to help. And we're going to make sure they get the support they need. But it's going to take more than just us, it'll take the whole community. The words seemed to hang in the air, carrying a quiet challenge. Mrs. Whitaker straightened, a spark of determination in her eyes. We'll be there. I know others who'd want to help, too. Layla and her family have always been good to us. It's our turn to give back. As Mrs. Whitaker spoke, Layla felt an unexpected swell of hope. She had grown so used to feeling alone, to carrying burdens in silence, that the thought of her neighbors rallying around her seemed almost too good to believe. In the days that followed, Captain Ava and Mrs. Whitaker kept their promise. They organized a gathering, bringing together friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard of Layla's bravery. Slowly, word spread throughout Willow Park. People came forward to donate supplies, offer their time, and share words of encouragement. For Layla, it was overwhelming. She had never been the center of attention, and she struggled to accept the help, feeling a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. Yet with each passing day, as she watched Josiah grow stronger and saw the community pull together, a new understanding began to settle within her. One afternoon, as she sat outside the fire station watching Josiah sleep, Captain Ava joined her, taking a seat on the bench beside her. You know, Ava began, breaking the comfortable silence. Courage doesn't always look the way people think it does. Sometimes it's just about showing up, even when things are hard. And that's what you did. Layla, you showed up for Josiah, for your mom. And now, this community is showing up for you. Layla looked up, her heart swelling as she took in Ava's words. For the first time, she felt a flicker of pride in what she had done. It wasn't just luck or desperation that had brought her here, it was her strength, her love for her family, and her belief that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward. As they sat there, watching the world move around them, Layla knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. She still didn't have all the answers, and there were still challenges ahead. But with Josiah in her arms and a community at her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks passed, Willow Park transformed in ways Layla hadn't thought possible. Neighbors who barely exchanged glances before were now bringing over meals, offering rides, and sharing comforting words. It felt strange to Layla, like stepping into a new world where she didn't have to shoulder every burden alone. Yet, beneath the surface, she still held on to fears and secrets that wouldn't disappear so easily. One evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, Layla sat on the porch steps of Mrs. Whitaker's home, rocking Josiah in her arms. The faint cries of children playing in the distance mingled with the soft rustling of trees. She could hear her mother's soft voice inside, speaking with Mrs. Whitaker. It was a rare sound. Trina, her mother, had kept to herself for as long as Layla could remember, retreating into a quiet world of her own. But tonight, she seemed a little more at ease, perhaps feeling the warmth of a community that had opened its arms to them. Just then, Captain Ava's truck pulled up to the curb, and she climbed out with her signature warm smile. Layla straightened up, waving as Ava approached. "Mind if I sit with you?" Ava asked, nodding toward the steps. Layla shook her head. patting the spot beside her. Of course not. Ava settled next to her, glancing down at Josiah, who was now peacefully asleep. He's looking stronger every day, she said softly. Layla smiled, brushing a finger across Josiah's tiny hand. Yeah. He is. I never thought he'd be this, okay. I was so scared. You know. Ava nodded, her gaze thoughtful. I know. Layla. But you've been so strong through all of this. Not just for Josiah, but for your mom too. Layla's face grew serious, her eyes dropping to the ground. I try to be strong. But sometimes it feels like I can't keep going. There's so much I don't understand. So much I don't know how to fix. Ava's hand found Layla's, a comforting presence in the cool evening air. You don't have to fix everything, Layla. Some things we face a little at a time. And it's okay to lean on others. You have people who want to help you now. A silence fell between them. And for a moment, Layla wondered if she could tell Ava everything, the secrets she kept even from herself. The quiet shame she felt about her family situation. But the words wouldn't come. Ava seemed to sense her hesitation. And instead of pushing, she simply squeezed Layla's hand gently. Whenever you're ready. We're here, Ava said. You don't have to carry it all alone. As Ava stood to leave, Mrs. Whitaker stepped outside, her warm eyes twinkling. Captain Ava, she called. How about staying for a cup of tea? I just made a fresh pot. Ava hesitated, glancing at Layla with a questioning smile. Layla nodded, her heart lightening at the thought of sharing this quiet, comforting moment. I'd love to, Ava said, following Mrs. Whitaker inside. As the three of them gathered around the kitchen table, Layla felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of belonging. Of being part of something good and whole. She watched as her mother joined them. Her face softened, her eyes less guarded. In this little kitchen, surrounded by laughter and warmth, the weight of their struggles seemed to lessen. If only for a little while. Yet as the evening wore on and Layla lay in bed that night, a new thought took hold in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to confront the past. Perhaps it was time to face the things her mother had hidden for so long. The pain and fear that had haunted them both. And maybe, with the support of people like Ava and Mrs. Whitaker, she could finally find the courage to ask the questions she had always been too afraid to voice. With Josiah asleep beside her, his tiny breaths a comforting rhythm in the darkness, Layla felt a new strength rising within her. She knew that the journey ahead would be challenging. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. A week later, Layla finally found the courage to talk to her mother. The night was quiet, and the house felt calm. With Josiah sleeping soundly in his crib and Mrs. Whitaker busy in the kitchen, Layla knew this might be her only chance to ask the questions she had held in for so long. Her mother, Trina, was sitting by the window, gazing out into the street with a distant look in her eyes. Layla took a deep breath and walked over, sitting down next to her. She could feel the words bubbling up. Words she'd kept inside for too long. Mom, Layla began softly. I need to understand. Why didn't you tell anyone about Josiah? Why didn't you ask for help? Trina's expression shifted. A flicker of something between sadness and guilt crossing her face. She looked down, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her sweater. After a moment, she sighed deeply, her shoulders sinking. "Oh, Layla," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "There's so much you don't know. So much I didn't want you to know. I was afraid of what people would think. Afraid of facing the past." Layla's heart pounded as she listened, sensing her mother's pain. "But, Mom, we can't keep living in fear. We're safe now. People care about us. Captain Ava, Mrs. Whitaker, the whole community. They've shown us kindness. And they want to help. Don't you think it's time to let go of those fears?" Trina's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her daughter, seeing in her a strength and maturity that both comforted and pained her. She reached out, taking Layla's hand in her own. "You're right. You've shown me more courage than I ever thought possible. I don't want to keep living in the shadows, hiding from everything." With a shaky breath, Trina began to open up, speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. She told Layla about her past, a troubled marriage that had left her heart broken and her spirit weary. The choices she had made out of desperation, and the deep shame she carried that kept her from reaching out for help. She explained that when she found out she was pregnant with Josiah, she was overwhelmed with fear, afraid that she'd be judged or, worse, that she'd fail both her children. Listening to her mother's story, Layla felt a wave of compassion rise within her. The anger and confusion she'd once felt melted away, replaced by a deep understanding. Her mother had been fighting her own battles, carrying a weight no one else could see. "Mom, you're not alone anymore," Layla whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We have people around us who care. And we're strong, we've made it this far. Let's stop hiding. Let's let people help us." Trina nodded slowly, wiping away a tear. "Thank you, Layla. You've given me more strength than I ever thought I had." They sat there in silence for a long moment, hands intertwined, the unspoken bond between them growing stronger. For the first time, Trina felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that maybe they could finally build a better life. One filled with honesty and resilience rather than fear and shame. In the days that followed, a change began to take root. Trina started to open up more, allowing the neighbors and community members to see a side of her that had long been hidden. She volunteered to help Mrs. Whitaker with meals, shared stories with Captain Ava, and slowly began to find her place among the people who had embraced them. Layla, too, found herself blossoming in this newfound support. She began to focus on her schoolwork, her mind clearer now that the weight of secrecy had been lifted. She looked after Josiah with a renewed sense of purpose, her love for him deepening as she watched him grow stronger with each passing day. One sunny afternoon, as they gathered at a community barbecue organized by the fire station, Layla looked around at the smiling faces, feeling a sense of gratitude she could hardly put into words. She spotted Captain Ava talking with Mrs. Whitaker, laughing over some story from the station. Her mother was nearby, holding Josiah as neighbors stopped to coo and chat. In that moment, Layla realized something profound. She wasn't just part of a family, she was part of a community. And that community had shown her that even in the face of adversity, kindness and courage could change everything. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the crowd, Layla closed her eyes and breathed in the cool evening air. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, Still moments of struggle and uncertainty. But now, she also knew she had the strength to face them. Supported by a family she had never expected and a community that believed in her. And with that, a new chapter in her life began. One filled with hope, love, and the unwavering belief that they could face any storm, together. The warmth of the community had given Layla and her family a renewed sense of purpose. But as the months wore on, life continued to bring challenges that tested their strength. Winter set in, bringing icy winds and long nights that seemed to stretch endlessly. Bills were piling up faster than Trina's part-time work could cover. And Layla had begun picking up odd jobs to contribute. Despite everything, their small home was filled with a spirit of resilience that hadn't been there before. One evening, as snow began to fall outside, Layla was helping her mother prepare dinner. Josiah lay on a blanket in the corner of the room, cooing softly as he played with a toy Captain Ava had brought him. The house was modest, the furnishings worn. But it had become a place of warmth and security, a feeling that had been absent for so long. "Layla, can you pass me the salt?" Trina asked, stirring a pot of soup. Her face looked tired but content. A softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Since opening up about her past, Trina had found new confidence. And though their challenges hadn't disappeared, they felt lighter. Layla handed her the salt, watching her mother with a smile. "It smells good, Mom." "I think Josiah agrees, he can't stop staring at the pot." Trina chuckled, glancing over at her baby boy. "I think he just likes being here with us. The three of us together, it's something I didn't think we'd have." Her voice softened, and she reached out to give Layla's hand a squeeze. "Thank you, Layla. I don't know what I would have done without you." Before Layla could respond, a loud knock sounded at the door, making them both jump. They exchanged a surprised look before Layla wiped her hands on a towel and hurried over. Opening the door, she was surprised to see Mrs. Whitaker standing there, bundled up in a thick coat and scarf, holding a basket. "Good evening, Layla," Mrs. Whitaker said with a broad smile. "I brought over a few things for you and your family, some extra food and winter clothes for little Josiah. I thought it might help with the cold spell coming in." Layla's face lit up with gratitude as she invited Mrs. Whitaker inside. The older woman placed the basket on the kitchen table, opening it to reveal a bounty of supplies, canned goods, warm blankets, and even a few hand-knit sweaters. "Oh, Mrs. Whitaker, thank you so much," Trina said, her voice full of emotion as she looked through the basket. "You have no idea how much this means to us." Mrs. Whitaker waved her hand dismissively, her eyes twinkling. "It's the least I can do, dear. You all have brought so much light to our little community. And I think I speak for everyone when I say we're grateful to have you here." As they all settled around the kitchen table, sipping hot tea and sharing stories, Layla felt a profound sense of belonging. She had grown so used to feeling like an outsider. But now, surrounded by people who truly cared, she felt grounded and at peace. The evening passed in warmth and laughter. And as Mrs. Whitaker prepared to leave, she pulled Layla aside. "You're a remarkable young lady, Layla," she said, her voice filled with affection. "Your courage has inspired us all. Remember, we're here for you, no matter what." After she left, Layla felt a new surge of determination. The trials they faced might not disappear, But with the support of friends like Mrs. Whitaker and Captain Ava, she knew they could weather the storms ahead. Yet, life soon reminded them that resilience would continue to be tested. A month later, a particularly harsh snowstorm hit Willow Park, blanketing the neighborhood in thick layers of snow. Streets were impassable, and power outages became common. Their house grew cold, and despite bundling up in layers, Layla could see Josiah shivering as he tried to sleep. She and her mother took turns holding him close to keep him warm. But each passing hour made their home feel more like an icebox. One evening, as they huddled together by the small heater that Mrs. Whitaker had lent them, Layla felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She had done everything she could to keep her family safe, but the bitter cold felt unrelenting. Her thoughts drifted to the fire station and the warmth it had always represented. The idea of reaching out for help nagged at her. Yet she hesitated, fearing they might be a burden. Noticing Layla's worry, Trina placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Layla. We have people who care about us. Remember, they'd want to help." Layla nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude for her mother's encouragement. Without another thought, she picked up the phone and dialed the fire station. Within minutes, Captain Ava answered, her calm voice a balm to Layla's frayed nerves. "Layla, I'm so glad you called. We've been checking in on families around the area," Ava said, her voice filled with concern. "Don't worry, we'll be there soon to bring you to the shelter." True to her word, within the hour, Captain Ava arrived with her team, wrapping Layla, Trina, and Josiah in blankets and helping them into the warmth of the fire truck. As they drove to the temporary shelter set up at a nearby community center, Layla looked out the window, watching as snow continued to fall in heavy, silent sheets. The shelter buzzed with activity, filled with families and neighbors seeking warmth and safety. As they settled into their temporary home, Layla felt a wave of relief wash over her. Once again, their community had rallied around them, proving that no matter the struggle, they didn't have to face it alone. That night, as they lay bundled together in the shelter, Layla listened to the steady breathing of her mother and little brother. Despite the hardship, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that they would be all right. The storm outside might rage on, but in this place, surrounded by people who cared, she knew they would make it through. And as she drifted off to sleep, Layla carried with her the comforting thought that, in this community, she was not just surviving, she was learning to thrive. Days passed, and the snowstorm eventually subsided, leaving Willow Park cloaked in a shimmering blanket of white. The community shelter bustled with warmth and activity, as neighbors shared meals and stories, each family bringing its own struggles and triumphs to the table. For Layla, it was a time of reflection, a chance to see just how far they had come. On the last night at the shelter, Captain Ava pulled Layla aside, her eyes shining with pride and warmth. "Layla," she began, "I just want you to know how much strength you've shown. You've faced more challenges than most people ever will. And you've done it all with such grace." Layla blushed, feeling both shy and proud. She hadn't expected to be seen as strong, she had simply been doing what she thought was right, fighting to keep her family safe. "Thank you, Captain Ava," she replied softly. "I didn't think we'd ever make it here. But you, and everyone, you all made it possible." Captain Ava's expression softened. And she placed a hand on Layla's shoulder. Strength doesn't mean you go through things alone. You've taught us as much as we've helped you. And remember, this community will always be here for you and your family. The following morning, they returned home. The crisp winter sun glinting off the snow. As they stepped inside, Layla's heart warmed at the sight of their small house, made brighter by the memories of kindness and support from their neighbors. She felt something shift within her, as if a layer of fear had melted away, leaving room for hope and trust. That spring, as the snow melted and flowers began to bloom, Layla found herself and her family becoming more deeply involved with the community. She volunteered at the fire station, organizing events with Captain Ava to bring the neighborhood closer together. She worked alongside Mrs. Whitaker to help neighbors in need, learning skills she hadn't known she possessed. Her mother, too, blossomed, lending her warmth and wisdom to others who had once felt alone. Josiah grew stronger with each passing day, his laughter filling their home with a joyful sound. He had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder of how love and courage could overcome any adversity. As he took his first steps, Layla felt a surge of pride, knowing that she had played a part in giving him a brighter future. One summer afternoon, as they celebrated Josiah's first birthday, the backyard filled with friends, neighbors, and laughter, Layla looked around, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Captain Ava, Mrs. Whitaker, and dozens of others had come to celebrate, each one bringing a small gift or simply a smile. The yard was decorated with handmade banners and balloons, each detail a testament to the love and care their community had shown. Layla looked at her mother, who held Josiah proudly, her face radiant with happiness. For the first time, she saw her mother as the strong, resilient woman she had always been beneath the fear. The scars of the past were still there, but they had transformed into marks of survival, reminders of the courage it took to start anew. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Captain Ava raised her glass, calling for everyone's attention. To Layla, Trina, and little Josiah, she said, her voice clear and full of pride, for showing us all that resilience isn't just about surviving, but about opening our hearts to others. You've reminded us of the power of kindness, community, and courage. Everyone raised their glasses, toasting to the family that had brought the community together. Layla felt tears prick her eyes as she looked around at the faces filled with love and pride. This was more than she had ever dreamed of. This was home, a place where her family was accepted, supported, and celebrated. As the evening wore on and the stars filled the sky, Layla sat back, holding Josiah on her lap, feeling the soft warmth of his tiny hands. She thought back to that cold, desperate night when she had walked into the fire station, carrying nothing but fear and hope. So much had changed since then, and she knew she would never again feel alone. Her journey had taught her that courage wasn't just in the big moments, but in the quiet choices, the steady resilience, and the willingness to trust others. She had found not only strength in herself but also a family in those around her, a family that had lifted them from the shadows and shown them the light. As she watched Josiah's eyes sparkle with joy, Layla knew their story was just beginning. Together, with the love of their community and the hope in their hearts, they would face whatever came their way. And for the first time, she truly believed in a brighter tomorrow.